Wow. Okay. So there's this YouTuber, this Asian guy named Hing, who did a video not too long ago talking about white privilege from an Asian perspective. And I immediately disagreed with a whole lot of stuff that he says. And this goes back to what I say is just one of the foundational pillars of why racism keeps going on and on and on. Is like people never want to analyze the actual history of America. People want to take the, the white oligarchs version of history, which basically says that, we fought against the British, then we ended slavery, and then everything's been fair since then, and white people are just better than everybody else. And then when black people point out, like, that's a very white supremacist way of looking at it, white supremacist not in Ku Klux Klan, but white supremacist in the sense of white is better than everything else, white is the top, and there's no such thing as being better than white. It's either white and then everything tiers below that, in some sort of a hierarchy. So I'm gonna kind of go old school that what I used to do, and I'm gonna play the video and comment on it as it goes through, because I heard part of his black privilege video, and I'm like, no, I need to comment on this. So I'm gonna do this video first, and I'll probably come back and do a commentary on his black privilege video. But anyway, here we go.
When you are done watching it, and be sure to join the Discord and the ideas that I talk about in my videos. So, just a little bit of an update before I get into today's topic. I'm going to go see Crazy Rich Asians later this week, and I will probably...
I'm going to skip all that part. Hang on, let me start trying to find it.
People have talked about white privilege, or I should just say an Asian person, this topic once and for all. White privilege. I cannot believe it is 2018 and people are still talking about white privilege. Now, this is going to come from the perspective...
People keep talking about it because it's still a real thing. I mean, we can Martin Luther King our way to oblivion, but so long as we still keep using, the old systems of, racial hierarchy, it still needs to be talked about.
Of an Asian American guy in America, or I should just say an Asian person in America.
Again, like I said before, Asians have been ignored as a population, and they actually are less of a population than what blacks are, well, obviously. But they're essentially have been an ignored population, and they kind of have kept to themselves, looking at the kind of just looking at some of the stuff that they've said. Like, and again, this is my own personal experience on this point. Some of the stuff that they've said and done in the past, and some of the Asians that I've talked to, like, they pretty much keep their heads down because they see the fighting back and forth between blacks and whites. So therefore, they kind of just keep quiet and don't really say anything. But yeah, Asians haven't been attacked like blacks have. Asians haven't been former slaves here. Asians haven't been, experimented on. So immediately saying, well, this is the Asian perspective of white privilege. It's like, I already know that you're going to take the white side of it. All right, here we go.
Okay, now I've seen a lot of people talk about white privilege. I mean, a lot of black people have talked about white privilege. A lot of white people have talked about talked about white privilege. I've yet to see a lot of Asians speaking up about white privilege. We simply just don't do it, people. Have you ever talked to an Asian person realistically about white privilege? Not from the context that they've endured prejudice or discrimination by whites because they were called Ching Chang Chong or all that kind of stuff, but real white privilege from a socioeconomic status. You ever heard of it from an Asian? Have you ever heard an East Asian or an Indian talk about white privilege? I'm guessing probably not, or probably not as commonly as you would hear other minorities complain about white privilege. It simply doesn't exist. It is just one of those things that have been fed to you for the longest time by progressive liberals and a lot of people on the left to keep you exactly where you are and to feel like you are part of this group identity, that you can't get ahead in America, that you can't make something of yourself. That race and that whites have an unfair racial advantage economically, socially, that will prevent you from getting ahead because they hold all the power in America. They hold all the cards. And shit, if you're black or you're a minority or, you're a Native American, you are just out of luck and you can't get anywhere.
Okay, so a quick comment on what he said about the socioeconomic status. See, and here's the funny thing is, here the thing is that I keep talking about as to why I'm pretty sure that until this is identified, racism will never get anywhere. Because racism is built upon classism here in the United States, and white people refuse to believe that there is a wealthy oligarch above them telling them like what to do, how to think, what's appropriate, what's not appropriate, etc., and so forth. And they're the ones who push all these, toxic agendas and whatnot. And the funny thing is like they're the ones that push feminism. They're the ones that are helping push all this, gender fluidity and all this other stuff. But then when you look at how they operate, no, men run things, women stay in the house and raise the kids, and then the wealth is passed on through the rest of the family. And it's really funny to watch, how they purposely push all these, agendas with the specified intent and goal of causing chaos in order to make themselves the controllers of society. It's really slick. Look up the Hegelian dialectic for more information on that. But anyway, like again, when it comes to Asians haven't been kicked out of society. Asians haven't been the bottom of society through slavery and then kept in that subordinate role as a collective group. So again, when he wants to sit here and talk about like, oh, that was some liberal conspiracy to keep your mind down, it's just like, okay, well, let's talk about how the ruling oligarchs do the same thing to keep whites down. And it's funny because when you approach people who have that mindset, they kind of understand it a little bit more when you put it in that context, but then they want to hide behind, oh, well, see, then it's not racist. And it's just like, but then when you take some of the things that super wealthy people who have power say about regular whites, you start to find out that it's a little bit different phrasing, but that's exactly what whites say about the lower class minority groups, and not just black. It's real funny. It's really, really funny how they want to hop in and out of conversations like, when they view themselves at the bottom of some hierarchy, it's, oh yeah, we see how this works and blah 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 blah. But then when they're at the top of a certain hierarchy, then it's, oh no, that's just in your head, dude. Like it's like, yeah, because you don't want to lose your position of advantage. They don't. And again, I posted a Facebook status upon this like the last day of Black History. It's like, until people acknowledge that we live in a hierarchy, and until people stop valuing stuff like that, we're gonna have racism. Because no one's trying to lose their position on the ladder. Everyone can clearly see how people are above them, but no one wants to talk about the people who are below them. Anyway, moving on.
I'm here to talk about that, and I'm here to clarify once and for all why it is not true. It has everything to do with choice. It has
Absolutely false. Absolutely false. Not everything to do with choice. Okay, unless. Let me say this, and again, I've already listened to this video, but I forget some of the points that he made. But let me say this: in talking to people who have made themselves wealthy, there's only one idea that you're gonna have that point actually falls on, and it requires a amount of segregation that most people are not comfortable with, like. You're going to have to get off the grid to an extent. Like, doesn't mean you have to like go out into the middle of the woods or do whatever, but you really have to be self-sufficient and not go the, I'm going to say corporate ladder way of doing it. Like, go get a job at a company, then work your way up the ladder, then save money, then hopefully you get to retire. Like, you cannot get wealthy off of that business model. The reason why they've trained everyone to be on that business model is so that the people who are in power will always have a workforce. And when they make you think that living life is about working for their company for all of your life, and the only way that you're going to get around that is if you go out and make your own business, and it's a lot of hard work, and they try to make it to where it's easier to just join their system than it is to go out and forge your own. And that has been done on purpose, because as John Rockefeller said, competition is a sin. They don't want competition, and they don't want people out there who they can't control. Like that's the ultimate name of the game. They want a little worker bee population in which they're royalty essentially, and everyone else just does their role in the society that they have built. That's how they look at it, and the only way that you're going to get out of that is if you go off and you basically make your own like empire within an empire, I guess, because nobody wants to lower their standard of living. Nobody's going to go off out into the middle of the woods and actually try to be their own person. But anyway, and that's what has to happen. And I'll get to this point later. But in order for black people to really thrive, they're gonna have to take that mentality. And sadly, that is the segregation that they say that people always want to fight against. I hate to say it, but Malcolm X was actually right on that point. It's like, if we want to live in a society where we, meaning black people, if we want to live in a society where we're not being told what to do by white folks, we need to not be in a society that's controlled by white folks. And it doesn't mean that we have to like leave America. We can actually go off and just form our own systems of government, still using the Bill of Rights and Constitution as a foundational document to use. But yeah, like as long as we stay in white-dominated areas, we just have to follow along with the plan. Again, we're only 13% of the population. But anyway, I'm gonna move on.
Anything to do with culture and environmental conditioning than it has to do with race. We all have equal opportunities here in America, and in fact, for a lot of minorities out there, there are already affirmative action plans in place that help you get jobs and help you get into college.
Affirmative action was created by white people, and affirmative action was also just a way for white people to sort of make things a little bit better, because they were very aware of their actions in keeping non-whites, not just blacks, non-whites out of things. But because they specifically attacked black people the most and the hardest, affirmative action was actually specifically geared towards blacks for that reason, although other minorities later benefited from it. But the actual affirmative action was to basically say, okay, black people, we see what we did, we see that we messed up your communities, so we're going to now make ourselves hire at least a certain amount of you, so to sort of like, ease the pain and the obvious screwing over that we did from your communities. Okay, so that's really what affirmative action was actually all about.
So the fact that we are still whining about the concept of white privilege, to me...
Oh, and affirmative action doesn't equalize anything. It's basically saying that you have to hire a small percentage of non-whites in positions at the company. And it doesn't mean that they have to be in high-level positions. It just means that they have to account for a certain amount of non-whites. But the funny thing is that they always kept the percentages super, 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 super low, like 5%, 10%, maybe 20. That's like really high, and I have no examples of a 20%er. But and I'm gonna look up the numbers, but it's usually around like 5 or 10% of a certain size company for affirmative action. And again, that varies across the board, and it's definitely shifted over the past few decades. I'm not even sure what even the current numbers are, but I'm talking about in its inception, a lot of the companies kept low percentages. So that low percentage would always be, the people who clean the floors, take the trash out, stuff like that. That's what blacks were hired in as. Yeah, move on.
Is honestly sickening, because it's not, number one, based on any facts, and number two, it's just victim mentality at the end of the day, which for a lot of you viewers who have been watching my videos for some time now already know my stance on it, okay? I am tired of the victim mentality, and I am tired of people blaming white people for all of their problems. Yeah, white people have done a lot of, have been responsible for discrimination against minorities historically, but indeed...
From the founding of the country all the way up until... some could argue it still happens today. I'm going to give a cutoff around the 90s. Okay, just for the sake of argument, to keep everybody on the same page, I'm going to say, matter of fact, no, here, let's do this. The year 2000. Let's just say everything was actually fair at the year 2000. Okay, yes, 1964 was when, the Civil Rights Act was signed, but he's going to bring up something later that I'm about to rip apart that that I'm going to use to negate 1964 to the year 2000.
These days, ever since the 60s, after the Civil Rights Act, after the Equal Pay Act, after equal employment, and, all of these opportunities came about for everybody, it's no longer a problem.
All right, here we go. I knew he was going to get to it. So he mentioned the 1964 Act and 1964 Civil Rights Act, saying that everything's been equal. Okay, so first off, and this is something that a lot of people who take that stance like to quote, and I'm just going to say this, and this is not the only evidence of it, but the Black Panther Party. So the Black Panther Party, I'm going to look this up kind of in live time here. But the Black Panther Party was infiltrated by the FBI. It was radicalized and then broken up. It was radicalized and then later on broken up and turned into the violent black group that we look at today. Okay, now here we go. It says the Black Panther Party was started in 1966, and ended in 1982. Actually, the Black Panther Party is still around, but the significant numbers were 1966, 1982. Now, they were formed in 1966, but the Civil Rights Act was in 1964. So if everything was equal, why did COINTELPRO with the FBI feel the need to go in there and break up the Black Panther Party? Matter of fact, here it is on Wikipedia. COINTELPRO, 1956-1971. It says was a series of covert and at sometimes illegal. So there we go again. White people breaking their own rules to subvert any sort of resistance, aimed at surveilling, infiltrating, discrediting, and disrupting domestic political organizations. Okay, and on their list, here's a list. FBI records show that COINTELPRO resources targeted groups and individuals that the FBI deemed subversive, including the Communist Party USA. I'll probably have to do another video, the background behind that. But anti-Vietnam War organizers, activists of the Civil Rights Movement or Black Power Movement, Martin Luther King, the Nation of Islam, and the Black Panther Party, feminist organizations in the American Indian movement, Native Americans obviously, independence movements, and a variety of organizations that were part of the broader New Left. The program also targeted the Ku Klux Klan, though these efforts were later admitted to be disingenuous. So, yeah, see, again, most of that were minorities. Okay, I mean, yeah, you got the Communist Party in there, you got feminist organizations, but we still got feminism hard and strong here. That hasn't been broken up. We got communism being somehow taught in schools now as sort of okay, it didn't work, but we just didn't do it right. Like, there's no infiltrating of that and breaking that up, but, again, the Vietnam Party, which was, or the anti-Vietnam War organizers, that was all sorts of free speech movements, and here we go against the Civil Rights Movement. It's just like black people were kept down again. Like, all we said was, hey, let us organize and have our own stuff, or just stop, destroying us. And, I mean, we're still here. We still have some of these conversations. Are things better now than they were back then? Yes, they were, but that has been because of natural social progression that has nothing to do with people being legislated into behaving properly, But, if everything's been fair since 1964, why was the FBI over here infiltrating the Black Panther Party? And I'll let you do your own research on the government experiments that happened against the Native Americans in the 1970s, right? I mean, it's ridiculous. As a matter of fact, here I'll go Black Panther Party. Okay, here's what the Black Panther Party initially stood for. So when people want to sit here and say, but they're a radical organization that hates white people. Here we go. Second paragraph, Wikipedia article. At its inception on October 15, 1966, the Black Panthers Party core practice was its armed citizens patrols to monitor the behavior of the officers of the Oakland Police Department and the challenge to police brutality in Oakland, California. So essentially the Black Lives Matter of the 1960s, right? In 1969, community social programs became a core activity of the party's members. The Black Panther Party instituted a variety of community social programs, most extensively the Free Breakfast for Children's program and the community health clinics to address issues like food injustice. The party enrolled most of the members and made the greatest impact in the Oakland, San Francisco Bay Area, New York, Chicago, Los Angeles, Seattle, and Philadelphia. So, see, the Black Panther Party started out as being personally responsible for the black community. Wow! But then they got infiltrated by the FBI and everything got broken up. So when people want to sit here and talk about how, black people need to take responsibility for their own communities, it's like, every time we try, you come in and subvert things. I mean, I was going to sit here and say, or use the, Black Wall Street, the race riot in 1921 in Tulsa, Oklahoma, in which, over 30 blocks of black-owned businesses and black residences were burned to the ground, and white people found themselves innocent of any wrongdoing, as an example as to how black people have been kept down. But I know everybody's going to say, well, that was 1921. What does that got to do with now? Civil rights made everything fair. It's like, no, civil rights was signed was signed before the Black Panther Party existed, and the intelligence agencies came right on in there and still broke it apart, right? And that still has to count as white supremacy, because who controls the FBI? Who controls the CIA? Who controls all of the intelligence agencies of the American government? It's white people. Now, yes, it is the white oligarchs, but again, we're talking about groups versus groups, and again, white people want to act like there isn't an oligarch. So if you're going to act like there's not an oligarch when there is an oligarch, and you want to look at it as though you're a part of that system of just, oh, well, there's no oligarchy, but it's the way society is, then that means you by default have to be responsible. So if you don't want to be responsible, you have to admit that there's an oligarchy. But if you don't want to do that, then you just have to take the L. Like you can't be a part of the group but not take responsibility for the actions of the group. You know, I mean, the funny thing is like in the black community, that's one of the big discussions. It's like, well, you know, we all want to be treated as individuals like white people do, but white people never do that. White people treat black people as a collective group. You know, yeah, they may have individual friends who they'll give a pass to, and I know that from experience. But by and large, they still hold black people as a collective group accountable for things that go on. But anyway, let's get back to this video. I'm only 4 minutes into this thing, and we got 11 more to go. I'm gonna let him go for a little while.
When we think about affluence in America, this is something that has been brought up by a lot of political commentators and a lot of personalities on the internet. People have written about it in the Huffington Post. It is not something that is a well-kept secret. I mean, hell, you could Wikipedia this and find this out. Asians are among the most affluent households by race per capita in the United States.
Not sure the exact numbers on that, but I have heard that Asians actually do make the most money. And this talks again about the whole, you know, white privilege / white supremacy angle on all this. So how is it that Asians are the per capita richest household? Asians have all of this upward mobility, and Asians are supposedly the best when it comes to the IQ test, which I'm not sure I can't remember if he mentions that or not. But all of these companies are still ran by white people. I mean, think about that. Like, if we really live in a meritocracy, which is, you know, saying that all of your actions are based on merit, or all of your success is based on the quality of work that you do, and, you know, you're judged off of your merit. Why aren't Asians running this country? I mean, like, think about that. Asians score the highest on the IQ test. Asians score the highest in school in general. Asians, like you just said, per capita earn the most money, but yet Asians are not found at high level corporate like businesses in top level positions like CEO, CFO, CIO, etc. and so forth. Like, yeah, you'll see Asians up there, but they're not like controlling the company and all of the aspects thereof. Why? See, it's things like that keep things disingenuous. All right, so here we go.
That is no surprise to some people, and that's the reason why we don't complain about white privilege. Why are we the most affluent race? Guess what? It comes down to simple choices and economics that determine the possibility of a good and fulfilling and well-paying career over time.
Absolutely false. Again, Asians haven't been targeted as a threat to air quotes white society. Because again, like their numbers aren't there. They're not the former slave population. They haven't been specifically targeted over generations and decades as a threat to the lifestyle of your average American white person. Therefore, they have been left alone and allowed to grow. I mean, let's go burn down all of the Chinatowns and predominantly Asian communities now. Send them back to the Stone Age, and then sit here and then have them rebuild. And every time they get 10 or 15 years down the line, go back and burn it down again, and then sit here, decades afterwards, finally leaving them alone and being like, well, Asians are at the bottom because that's just how Asians are. It's just like, oh, so we're just going to ignore all of the burning down of their communities and the not rebuilding and the keeping them out of the rest of society. We're just going to ignore all of that. Why, yes, we are. And see, like, and that's one of those things that sets black people off. But anyway, again, like, we don't live in a meritocracy. People need to get that out of their head. People keep holding on to, like, what we were taught in school about America. Like, all of that was a lie. And I don't know how many areas and evidence we need to show that this was a lie when it comes to minorities. Now, if you're white, yeah, you can probably kind of live by that, but even then, not really, because you were told to live in a system where working for a company for your entire life is the way to success, and how many we're like 5 generations in, and that doesn't work, and people still keep doing it. So like even if you're white, you still have to capitulate to the hierarchy, or you have to kind of segregate yourself from the system. Anyway, I don't get too much far in economics about that, but let's keep going.
I talk about it in terms of education. This is where our stereotype comes into the mix. We study hard, we work hard, we go to good schools, and despite affirmative action plans that have been put into place to keep us, or to make the barrier to entry more difficult for Asians, we still get into these schools, we still get good jobs, and we still work hard and hold those jobs. Asians have the most, we're the highest demographic of master's degrees holders and graduate degrees, although I don't necessarily think that advanced and postgraduate education is necessarily key to a successful career. It has something to say with affluence when it comes to economics in this country. Now, when you think about Asians and how we've been able to get ahead, it completely disassembles the whole concept of white privilege. Because here's
No, it doesn't.
where it comes into play. Asians, and I'm going to be generalizing here a little bit, but you know what? I'm going to go ahead and do it. I don't care about being politically incorrect.
I hate it when people say that they're going to go ahead and generalize, because it's like we're talking about general groups of people. You have to generalize, okay? Anyway, I just wanted to throw that in there.
You're focused on your goals, you can get ahead here in America. When I talk about culture as it pertains to other races, here's something to keep in mind, because it is one of the biggest socioeconomic indicators that keep people in poverty and from getting above the lower middle class in America. And that has to do with, surprise, having children out of wedlock. It is something that is a choice, that is a cultural thing that is more prevalent in the African American community. Single black motherhood is 70+%. That's not me trying to be insensitive. That is just a fact. And when it comes to whites, it's around 20-something%. With Asians, it's around 15 to 17%. So right there, that already tells you that we are the lowest percentage when it comes to having children out of wedlock.
Okay, again, nobody wants to. I'm not going to go into it because nobody wants to have an honest, serious conversation about why the single motherhood in the black community is what it is. And at this point, some things have gone on for so long that it's just a black conversation right now. And I'll give him that. The black community does have to get rid of this single motherhood, and the black community has been on it. But again, like due to the unchecked residual effects of what's gone on to the black community since the ending of slavery, some things should not just be stated within a vacuum, and that's something that is stated within the vacuum. Is nobody wants to ask why are black women having such high numbers of kids out of wedlock, and again, to go to why Asians have such low numbers, again, like Asians didn't have to give up all of their culture when they got to America, because again, they were kind of left alone. I mean, yes, you probably had to change your name from some Chinese name or Japanese name and be given the name of, Smith or Chow or something that Americans can spell, But by and large, Asians could still keep everything Asian. And again, Chinatowns weren't burned down across the board, okay? So patting yourself on the back for keeping, a patriarchal system essentially is kind of disingenuous, and again, say, okay, well, white people have a higher percentage of single motherhood than Asians. Yeah, but again, that's a white issue as to why that happens. And yeah, I can go into it, but that really has nothing to do with white privilege. That's just what white people are doing right now. And it really goes back to, again, the oligarchs, pushing chaos on the population. But that's a white conversation, and this is a white privilege conversation. And in order to have a white privilege conversation, you have to talk about whites being the dominant force compared to minorities who are not the dominant force, and that I'll try to keep things focused on that. Keep things focused in that realm.
When it comes to dropouts, blacks tend to be the highest percentage when it comes to dropout rates in schools, and this is where I believe that affirmative action does not benefit African Americans. I've already talked about how affirmative action is harmful to minorities. With blacks, Why would you lower the standard, the barrier to entry to going to schools? Are you really setting them up for success in the long run? Black dropouts are more prevalent when you have affirmative action in place. And also, it's no different with the workplace. If people are hired based on affirmative action because they are minorities, they're not going to stick around. They're not going to succeed in the workplace.
Okay, first off, I'm I know I said stop. Real quick, affirmative action has been detrimental to the black community, but not for the reasons that he said. One of the side effects of affirmative action that the black community has suffered from isn't the fact of, we were just let in because of whatever. I'm going to go with 10% just to keep the numbers simple. So if affirmative action tells a white-owned company that it has to hire 10% of blacks to fit its affirmative action quota, what do you think that that's going to do for the white company? Are they just going to go pick, 10% amount of random black people, or are they going to go to the best of the best? They go to the best of the best. And that was something that I was even taught by, the black members of society, who were, college educated up with the mobile. They said, like these white companies, when they go out here and they have to fill their affirmative action quota, they don't just walk around and randomly collect, black people to fill the quota. They go to the, to the black institutions and get the best of the best black people, or they go to the, black people who are allowed in the white institutions, and they get the best of the best from those people. So then it creates hyper competition amongst black folks. So it's like, okay, I know that they have to hire black folks, but now I have to get in the upper echelon of my own group, so I'm of the people who they can possibly select to go work at their company. That has been the effect of affirmative action. So when they want to sit here and say that, okay, well, a company hired a guy because he was black to fit the affirmative action quota, and he didn't last here, it's not that he or she didn't last because that they weren't doing their job. I mean, ask the people who have done it. They leave their job because it's, I was an affirmative action hire, but because I was an affirmative action hire, now no one wants to work with me because no one thinks that I have the merit to be here. So, I'm always treated different and I'm excluded from, this, that, and the third. But in the actual case is they're probably actually better because they were put in a system in which they had to be hyper competitive to be at the top of the pool that was selected for the affirmative action hire. And a lot of the times, these affirmative action people are actually more qualified than the people who actually already work there. But because the company had to fill an affirmative action quota, everyone just looks at that and not the fact that this person has a laundry list long resume that shows why they're actually capable of holding that position. No. They just want to look at the fact of, we hired X amount of black people because we had to, and we don't care about their accreditations. We just feel some type of way about that. Which, from a white perspective, I can kind of understand, but given the information that I just told you, which, again, most people don't know the perspective of how certain actions affect other actions, people don't look at it like that. So they think that, black people are getting a free ride. Well, actually, no, black people are not getting a free ride. And it's common knowledge in the black community, or this is a common saying in the black community, especially amongst my age group and older, is that you have to be twice as good, or you have to do twice as well to be considered half as good. So when you sit here and talk about affirmative action, it's like you're talking about people who have lived by that mantra. So to sit here and say that they're not capable of a job because of, they got hired through affirmative action, like there's just all sorts of contradictions with that, But anyway, let's go on. We're almost finished.
So when it comes to dropouts, people not finishing high school, forgive me for sounding politically incorrect, but it is still the black community or black population as a whole and a ton of the white demographic as well. Now, Asians only make up about 5% of the United States population. So compared to the amount of
black people make up 13
people there are in the United States relative to blacks and to whites, we are the minority in that regard. But if you think about it from a ratio standpoint, I mean, how many Asian dropouts do you know? How many Asians do you know are having children out of wedlock? Now, I'm not saying that they don't. I'm not going to go as far as to say that that is, but it's just not as common. And that leads to overall affluence in America. The Brookings Institute, as it's referenced by the Daily Wire, by a lot of political commentators out there, have referenced the three biggest things that will keep you out of poverty. And the biggest factor is having children out of wedlock. If you have children out of wedlock, that is one thing that prevents you from getting ahead in America. And that
A little bit looking into that. Just having kids out of wedlock does not mean that you won't get ahead in America, because America is judged based off of how much money you make. Doesn't matter how you make it, just, well, as long as it's legal. And there are plenty of people who have made it wealthy being a single parent. I mean, I can even throw it back. If you want to use black people, I can throw it back to Madam C.J. Walker. You know, she was the first self-made female millionaire in America, period. Like, not just black woman, but, woman, period. And she was a single mother. That part never gets really highlighted, obviously so. But yeah, she was a single mother. So to sit here and say that single parenthood or having kids out of wedlock prevents you from doing that is false. What prevents you from doing that is that you're getting rid of the stable home environment, and then you don't pass down wealth to anybody. And people who have to deal with kids by themselves are too busy taking care of their kids to actually have someone else there to help them help take the burden of responsibilities off of their plate, so they can focus more on obtaining material wealth and material possessions. So it's not just having kids outside of wedlock, because I know people who've had kids outside of wedlock and they're not doing half bad. Now again, they dump their kids on their parents, or grandparents, but at the end of the day, that's why. So it's like it's you need a stable structure. When the black community, we don't have that stable structure. Because insert the history of blacks in America, and then now we're in this, this death spiral, and then the people want to sit here and say it's like, oh, well, it's because of your culture. It's like, oh, stop it. It's just like you can't push someone off a cliff, watch them roll down the cliff, and then tell them that their legs are broken because they weren't watching where they were going when you actively push them down the cliff. Like, stop it. Anyway, let's keep going.
That is especially common in those minority groups and demographics that I mentioned prior. The other two things is making sure you don't drop out of high school, that you finish high school, and the other thing, just have a full-time job. If you do those three things, those are all as a result of choice, of working hard, and of taking personal accountability and responsibility and getting ahead in America. It's got nothing to do with race, people. It has everything to do with culture and everything to do with personal responsibility, okay? There are not laws that make it more favorable to whites, okay? There are not,
And we're going to stop right there for a minute. Okay, so I got to address this point. So you said there's not laws to make it more favorable towards white people. And again, he keeps he's speaking from a modernistic way of thinking. So we're going to Google redlining. And what redlining is, oh, hang on. Oh, it didn't send me the right one. Here, that was Google. We're going to go to the dictionary definition. All right, redlining, a discriminatory practice by which banks, insurance companies, etc. refuse or limit mortgages, or limit loans, mortgages, insurance, etc. within a specific geographic area, especially inner city neighborhoods. Okay, so that was a common practice right before the civil rights era, and some would even argue that it was even done after the civil rights era. But yeah, like that's also been a tactic that has been used to keep the black community down. So you can sit here and talk about personal responsibility all you want, but with things like that in place, you can be personally responsible and still not, make it ahead in life. Here, let's go to Wikipedia real quick. Wikipedia says it's the systematic denial of various services to residents of specific, often racially associated neighborhoods or communities, either directly or indirectly through selective raising of prices. Again, this goes back to history. Here we go. Effects. They even have their own section on Wikipedia. It's called the Black-White Wealth Gap. Here we go. I'm just going to read part of this because it's way too long. Well, it's not that long, but I'm not going to read all of it. The structural racism actively helped to create what is now known as the black-white wealth gap we see in America today. Wealth is what provides/allows opportunities for the American family. A family can survive on an income yeah, on an income alone, but wealth is what provides for a economic mobility and safety in the event of an emergency. This primary difference is what works to set apart people of color, in particular black Americans, and affluent white Americans. Unfortunately, the wealth is unevenly distributed on a basis of race, which is, again, really class, and a process that can then be traced back to the times of slavery, as been stated before, allowing whites to profit off the bodies of an enslaved people who are not allowed to live freely or build any wealth of some sort. I'm gonna cut it off there. And then it goes on to talk about Jim Crow and the the prison industrial complex, and how redlining had a little bit to do with that. So yeah, I mean, again, like the intellectual dishonesty talking about, oh, it's your personal decisions. It's only your personal decisions all the way up until the government throws you in jail, regardless. So anyway, moving on.
Constructs out there that make it impossible for minorities to get ahead. Because why would Asians be among the most affluent demographic in the United States? Why are they the top income earners? Answer me that. This is the thing when you start to take into account a lot of these economic statistics when it comes to...
Okay, he mentioned Asians, and I kind of scrolled a little bit, and they brought it here. So let's see what they have to say. It says, Asian Americans are redlining. Like all minorities, Asians have been deeply affected by discriminatory housing policies of the 20th century, including redlining and restrictive racial covenants. Those laws and regulations prevented many racial and ethnic minorities from buying in suburban areas, buying certain homes from white people, and being able to get a loan in minority-heavy neighborhoods. Asian Americans persevered, boasted the highest homeownership rate of any single minority group beginning in 1970, post-civil rights again. Beginning in 1970, their share of homeownership market is now even with the share of the overall U.S. population, despite the fact that so many live in coastal cities where renting is popular. So again, they were left alone. So see, now they own the amount of houses that is directly proportional to their amount of population in the United States. So yeah, that's the way it should be. And if things had been fair, but again, remember, he already said they're only like 5% of the population. So blacks should be 13%, yet we're not. I don't know what the numbers are. It didn't really say here, but I'm not gonna look it up. But yeah, man, it's just, again, like, black people have been systematically singled out and attacked. That's why all of these other minorities who've come here after us have surpassed us in general conditions of the community. Anyway, moving on, it's almost over.
Debunking this whole aspect of white privilege. It is nothing but a myth that has been conducted and concocted by the Democratic Party and by a lot of practicing progressives on the left. So I want to leave you with that. White privilege is not something that Asians talk about. But here's an Asian guy talking about it, and I'm telling you that it's a complete myth. If you're a minority in America, it's all about the choices that you make. It's about getting ahead, taking personal responsibility, finishing school, doing whatever it takes to get ahead, and not blaming the white male or the white race for all of your problems. Whites are not responsible for the decisions that you make, okay? They don't decide for you to have kids out of wedlock. They don't tell you to drop out of school. They're not responsible for that. You are responsible for your own decisions, and that's what...
Okay, again, in a vacuum, that's true, but let's look at all the things that led up to the single motherhood. Let's look at all the things that lead up to blacks dropping out of school and why they feel they need to drop out of school. Because again, it has to do with other factors that aren't directly tied to just they have no interest, But, yeah, he pretty much wrapped up there, so I'm gonna leave that at that. But yeah, see, like this lack of knowing what all has happened to the black community is like, it's annoying, because like we can't get anywhere. Like, when you keep all of this history blocked off and barricaded away, and then you just make these outrageous statements like, oh, black people are poor because that's just how Negroes are, and you need to stay away from them and their communities, and they have a culture issue and they refuse to change, which you can believe that. But when you pull out the history, then it's like, you purposely keep them down, then they get discouraged, and then when they don't want to do anything because they know what you do to them, then you tell everyone else that you didn't do it to them, or you take your boot off their neck for the quick second while you show everyone, like, see, I'm not holding them down. They go, oh, okay, and they turn their back and you put your boot right back on their neck. It's easy how to get confused, but that's all I wanted to address was this dude's video. I'm gonna compare and contrast what he has to talk about when it comes to black privilege, because he did this black privilege video in response to the Jesse Smollett incident, which I'm not gonna do a video on that because I got an issue with black Hollywood liberals anyway. But anyway, that's my video. John from the Gen XY. Daggone it. John from XY Rising.